Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. Laszlo Montgomery here. Thanks for tuning in to the China History Podcast. Almost, but not quite halfway through with this epic series, introducing everything about Chinese philosophy that you'd need to know if you ever participated in a game show where the category was Chinese philosophers. Here I'm going to introduce Xunzi's other claim to fame, namely his two famous students. And today in this episode, we're going to look at legalism and how it became the ideology embraced by the first Qin emperor, and I guess you could say a lot of emperors who followed as well. Let's first talk about Han Fei and Li Si. Master Han Fei, of course famous for the Han Fei Zi, the 55-chapter book that bears his name, and Li Si, the Machiavellian right-hand man to the first emperor, and also a giant in Chinese culture too, the small seal script and other things. Both of these luminaries from Chinese history studied at the Jixia Academy in Qi under Xunzi. Xunzi died in 238 BCE. The final and longest reigning Zhou dynasty king, King Nan, was deposed in 256 BCE in Xunzi's lifetime. Then from 259 to 221 BCE, Qin Shi Huang will do his thing and finish up his conquest of all the warring states. And after his annexation of the once unstoppable Qi state, there will be a unified Chinese country with an emperor ruling over a large landmass for the first time. But remember, geographically, this Chinese empire may have been a new polity, but the culture contained within this empire was already a good 2,000 years old. The Zhou dynasty may have fallen in 256 BCE, but the decline really began in the 8th century BCE. So it's safe to say for something like 500 years in China, people have been living in a society where there was no strong central authority, and you never knew when some neighboring state might invade your homeland. 500 years ago for us was the year 1521. So stop and think about living in a place for more than 50 generations where all you knew was the specter of war. That's a long time. Guangzhong primed the pump for Confucius, and it was Shang Yang as well as Shen Buhai and Shen Dao. They did the same thing for Han Fei and Li Si. Shang Yang, 390 to 338 BCE, was a contemporary of Mengzi and Xunzi. He was a nobleman who served as an advisor to Duke Xiao of Qin. Shang Yang introduced reforms in Qin that greatly enhanced the power and reach of the central authority. These reforms called for strict laws and severe punishments that, in theory, would deter people from deviating from the party line, so to speak. Reforms were also carried out in trade and commerce as well, and on controlling the movements of the people. All of Shang Yang's main ideas were written into the Book of Lord Shang. Yeah, you guessed it, known as the Shangzi, or the Shangjun Shu. It wasn't what you would call legalism, but Shangzi surely gave Han Fei and Li Si food for thought. Shen Buhai is quite an interesting historic figure. Aside from his work in legalist thought and its impact on Han Fei and the legalism adopted by the Qin, Shen Buhai is known as one of the creators of the Chinese administrative system. The legalists are credited with discovering and implementing the so-called imperial administrative system that lasted for 2,000 years. Well, Shen Buhai, not an A-lister, I can tell you that. His contribution in actually designing the system was profound, especially with respect to establishing a meritocratic system. And this will later lead to the subsequent civil service exams. Shen Buhai was one of the first to say, "Screw virtue. Give me leaders who know how to do their job." Han Fei and Li Si were born in the same year, 280 BCE. Han Fei came from Han State. Ancient Han State was quite small and surrounded by Chu, Qin, and Wei. Talk about two rocks in a hard place. Han today would be spread out over portions of Shanxi and Henan. It's said Han Fei became so disgusted with the degradation in the Han rulers' leadership abilities, He got fed up and bolted. And as I said, he later ended up studying at the Jixia Academy under Xunzi, and there he met Li Si. As Sima Qian tells it, Han Fei, he had a stutter, which limited his options as far as becoming an orator or teacher went. Therefore, Han Fei put all his talents into writing. And of all the Chinese classics, and I have it on good authority, the Han Fei Zi is the most elegantly written. One day, Han Fei received a letter from his old schoolmate, Li Si. Li Si knew the prime minister to Ying Zheng, king of Qin. And this prime minister, of course, was Lu Buwei, who we all know, after helping his king, Ying Zheng, make it to the top, is going to come to a bad end. Lu Buwei was Li Si's connection at the royal palace. Li Si became a very close advisor to the future emperor of China, and he remembered his old classmate back at the Jixia Academy days and called him out to Qin to help him do all these great things. So off to Qin, Han Fei went, and to say that he became a big hit there is quite the understatement. Han Fei, by this time in his career, had figured people out. Like his teacher Xunzi, he agreed, people, they ain't no good. Han Fei wrote, quote, "The natural aspirations of the people are such that they are moved towards security and benefit and avoid danger and poverty. Public-spirited people are few, while private-minded people are numerous." End quote. And further to this, Han Fei did not believe education or purposeful self-cultivation worked either, not on a practical level. Han Fei's famous words, quote, "People go for benefits as water flows downwards," end quote. So where do we go from the viewpoint that people ain't no good from the start? That sure is an uphill climb. Han Fei said people were like wood. He said, look at such a commonplace, plentiful thing like an arrow. Don't we use the term straight as an arrow? Well, you can't find wood that's straight in nature. You have to condition it and put it through a process to make that arrow straight. You just can't pick a branch off a tree and stick an arrowhead on the end. Han Fei said people were the same way. He parted ways with Confucius, Mengzi, Xunzi, and all those Ru school philosophers. He said, yeah, all these traditions, the rituals, learning, and etiquette are all nice to follow, and maybe they make some people good. But it's just not practical. How many Confucians can you find out there who are truly capable to administer the country? The great sage only had 77 disciples. That's not enough firepower to make a difference on a national scale. Han Fei said, there's nothing that can beat the effectiveness of the carrot and the stick. If you want to efficiently run government, you must establish a true meritocracy where only the most talented will rise. Their virtue or other Confucian qualities are subordinate to the quality of the job they perform. Furthermore, the system ran on the principle that everyone along the chain of command, from the highest official down to the village peasant, had something in it for them if they did well and followed the rules. These Ru school philosophers particularly lionized the ancients and pointed to them as the examples to follow. Han Fei said those guys are all dead and gone, and times have changed drastically since they walked the earth. Like most of the philosophers of the Zhou era, he believed the answer to creating a rich and prosperous society all began with the central authority, the king, for example.
How does he ensure his kingdom is staffed by the best officials?
The military is top rate, and the peasants always productive. Han Fei teaches there are 5 tools at the ruler's disposal. First is the power of his position. There are also administrative methods. Third is the law. Fourth are the 2 handles. And fifth is the way, or dao, of the ruler. The 2 handles. What are those? Han Fei calls these the 2 things that the ruler, and only the ruler, with no exceptions, can control. This is the authority to divvy out rewards and punishment. If he allowed one of his ministers to wield this power on his behalf, Han Fei said the people would no longer fear the king and would instead try to curry favor and avoid getting on the bad side of the one who held this authority. Only the ruler touched those so-called two handles of government. Han Fei said legalism worked this way. First, you put into place a legal system and make sure everyone from the bottom up all understood it. Everyone knew what lines not to cross and what was expected from them. Is a person good? Are they bad? What was a person's innate nature? Han Fei said it didn't matter. That wasn't going to do anything, and besides, it was entirely impractical, too theoretical. Virtue was nice, but laws were what kept people in order. People didn't have to be good, but they were not allowed to be bad. Legalism didn't seek to improve people. It was all about just managing them. Legalism wasn't just all about laws. It was both an ideology, administrative, and a political system, all rolled up into one. And the ruler need not be a sage. Their power was derived through their authority, not their virtue and benevolence. Just as Shen Buhai had said in the mid-4th century BCE, the kings used the dou of their position. Acting like a ruler is supposed to act, managing their officials and ministers, saying little, but controlling everything. Because people are born selfish, the ruler appeals to the self-serving nature of people and hangs rewards and profit in front of them as encouragement to do well. And for those who break the laws, no matter who you were, everyone paid equally. Han Fei believed this system was foolproof because it appealed to the natural evilness of human nature. All people had to do was act naturally, and as long as the laws are enforced, in time, everything will become second nature to everyone. So you could see how something like this, and it was very detailed, how it would appeal to a ruler. Confucianists failed to offer a solution. Their thought was too theoretical. If it only worked, it would be great, but it didn't. Legalism was the practical solution. Idealism versus realism. That's legalism in a peanut shell. People by nature are not, as Mengzi would have you believe, innately good. They are the opposite. And for this reason, you have to build a socio-political system that recognizes these selfish interests that people have. If people see they can attain pleasure and avoid pain by acting in a certain way, that's all that matters. This idea had profound political ramifications. The ruler, through their intrinsic power over the two handles, crafted a very tight, well-controlled administrative bureaucracy. If you showed quantifiable results, you worked your way up. If you were bad at your job, you went nowhere, or worse. Legalism's contribution to the future growth of China was in part due to its role in building the superstructure of the imperial bureaucracy. The Qin dynasty didn't last too long, but this way of organizing the government did, a real long time. Again, Shen Buhai, he's the unsung hero of this achievement. Han Feizi, as I mentioned earlier, became the darling of the Qin court. His elegant and forceful writing, where he so exquisitely synthesized the legalist writings of those who came before him, and took all these ideas and injected his thought that was specifically relevant to those late 3rd century BCE times, he became everyone's favorite. And that's when Li Si decided to turn on his old Jixia Academy classmate. Fearing that his star might possibly be eclipsed by Han Fei, Li Si began to suspect him and became jealous of all this attention he was getting, especially at the royal court. So one day, in 233 BCE, Li Si whispered to the king, Yingzheng, that Han Fei couldn't be trusted, and he gave a bunch of reasons. And the future first emperor, a man who was known for his paranoia, thereupon ordered Han Fei to be locked up in prison. Then, as the story goes, Li Si was so worried that King Yingzheng would change his mind, he sent poison to Han Fei in his jail cell and suggested he better take this painless way out rather than suffer what the king had in store for him. Then, sure enough, just as Li Si feared, the king had a change of mind about the matter and called for Han Fei to be released. But too late. Han Fei had already been tricked into consuming the poison. A double betrayal by Li Si, but he'll get his later on. So Han Fei never lived to see the great success his ideology became during that rigid, severe decade of the Qin dynasty. The success of legalism as the state ideology didn't win any popularity contests. Once Qin Shi Huang sealed his victory in 221 BCE, a few things are going to happen that will blow a little wind into the sails of legalism. In addition to building the Great Wall and his magnificent tomb, the first Qin emperor had a lot of big ideas about the direction he wanted to take China. From the moment the Qin emperor declared victory, he faced his detractors. The loudest voices were all coming from these many philosophers. They acted in a way like the conscience of the day. They spoke out, no doubt quite eloquently, against some of the policies called for by the Qin emperor. Well, Li Si has the ignoble honor of being the one written into the histories who advised his emperor about a way to get rid of these troublesome, meddling philosophers and all their heated opposing opinions wafting about the palace in Shen Yang, the modern-day city of Xi'an. Li Si believed a lot less resistance would be felt at the top if there was only, one single political philosophy to rule them all, so to speak. 100 schools, as far as Li Si was concerned, was 99 too many. He sold this idea to Qin Shi Huang, and in 213 BCE, truly a year that will live in infamy forevermore, a torch was put to all the books that concern themselves with philosophy, ideology, and literature. Technical books, the I Ching, and anything that had a legalist bent were the only texts allowed. Now, when I say all these works were destroyed, let me say not everything got put to the torch, but a lot did. And just as with the fire that gutted the Library of Alexandria, we can only wonder how much knowledge and wisdom was lost to the ages as a result of Qin Shi Huang's 213 BCE edict. Any works that could be saved were buried underground until the times changed. It was a huge blow to intellectual discourse and to the cause of preserving China's heritage. 3 years later, in 210 BCE, the Confucianists were silenced when 460 of them were supposedly buried alive. In these two acts, burning the books and burying the scholars, the ultimate goal of having one single state ideology across the land was achieved. And for his hand in all this, Li Si is going to run the ancient Chinese gauntlet of vilification. Sima Qian is not going to be kind to him, and neither will the other Han Dynasty historians. No one could say if this is truth or fiction. Burning the books, burying the scholars, it's been part of Chinese history lore since Sima Qian published the first edition of the Shi Ji. Now, before we move on, let us not forget that it was Li Si, more than anyone else, who managed the projects that were all credited to Qin Shi Huang in Chinese culture, standardizing the characters, weights, measures, currency, and setting in place all the gears, wheels, switches, and pulleys of the Chinese state, the complete mechanism. Legalism was not for the squeamish. Depending on where you were on the totem pole, life was most unforgiving and harsh. The Han swept away the Qin in 206 BCE and carried out a major realignment. But after enjoying a nice time on the stage, legalism is going to be swept away and dissed entirely. And remember Xunzi. He's going to fall from grace real hard for being the teacher of Li Si and Han Feizi. Xunzi agreed with the legalists that people weren't born innately good. But other than that, he was all straight Confucianism with a few nice improvements added on. As Liu Bang began to get his new Han Dynasty in order, he had to take stock of the situation. He was the first of only 2 people in Chinese history to have come from a common, non-aristocratic background and lead the fight to found a dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang of the Ming being the other. And Liu Bang was known by his temple name of Han Gaozu. He needed some serious legitimizing, and having a guy like him as the emperor, well, something was needed to give him and his new dynasty some shine, not to mention legitimacy. It wasn't enough that the Qin dynasty was finished. A lot of people came out with their swords to give it to them. Now, I'm not comparing it to the Cultural Revolution, but it was a long decade of unpleasantness, and when it was over, everyone muttered goodbye and good riddance under their breath. And for Confucianism, being the antithesis of legalism, it was never looking better. And during the Han Dynasty, Confucianism is going to have one heck of a golden age. In deconstructing the Qin Dynasty, Han Gaozu started loosening up the laws. What we would call a capital offense, well, those were still subject to severe penalties. But for a lot of other things that impacted everyone, things loosened up, and life began to settle down. And then once everything was nice and stable, Confucianism began its comeback. Han Gaozu fought for and won everything that had been created and put in place by the Qin. Say what you will about Qin Shi Huang, tyrant, a profligate. He put a government structure in place that really allowed the Han Dynasty to get off to a flaming hot start. The Han will expand the map of China to its greatest extent in BCE times. That was quite a sizable operation to manage, and the perfect solution ended up being the Confucianists. They were educated, capable, knew all the ceremonies and rituals, how to read the calendar. They were one-stop shopping for Han Gaozu.
So, before we continue on and look at the triumph of Confucianism and the Han, let's slip the bookmark in and hold off till next time when we look at the very consequential but underrated official Dong Zhongshu and see how he facilitated the embrace of Confucianism by the emperor and the imperial government. And this was an embrace that lasted on and off for over 2,000 years. That's all for next time. This is Laszlo Montgomery thanking you once again for listening. Be sure to come back next time for another exciting episode of the China History Podcast.